kind of starts this off, which is, the whole sort of purpose and sort of kind of function of a lot of sub-area planning and LCI planning, which Cedric referenced before, is really about economic development and revitalization and redevelopment. Um, Now, what we're here to do is not necessarily to answer all the challenges to redevelopment, but we want to work within the context of it. And overall, our goal is to focus on what are the public side investments that can be brought to bear to help encourage private sector investment. So that's really kind of where we're looking. And when we look at redevelopment, um, Jonathan, do you mind going to the next slide? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there's the study area. So when we talk about redevelopment, there's a lot of dynamics to go into how, what are the economics behind what happens when a property changes from one thing to something else. And we certainly want to recognize that there are some positives. There's some really good things that are happening in this small node area around Glenwood and Columbia. And we've heard that already in some of the engagement we've heard. But we also know there are some challenges. There are some properties that are eyesores, and they've been eyesores for a while. And that's all to say that we didn't get here overnight. There's structural and institutional things that have led us to where we are. Some of them are very macro oriented. Not necessarily disinvestment at the county level, but just sort of broad disinvestment, relative to certain demographics. And there's just some big picture things that we're working within. So I just claim that as planners who are coming up with a vision for this area, there's things that are much larger than what we can, simply say we can address all these things as part of this process. But we want to recognize the context of what we're doing. And along those lines, when it comes to redevelopment, very often you may drive by a property and you may be thinking, why can't that shopping center or that apartment complex or whatever it is, why can't that just be something nicer to look at and something better, and have maybe businesses that are more in line with what I want to see in my neighborhood. And the truth is that it feels like that should be simple, but it's actually incredibly complicated. And the reason why is that if you're a property owner and you're looking at potentially redeveloping, you're taking on a tremendous amount of risk. If you're going to redevelop your property, even if it's just to do, for instance, facade improvements, which would be to, something as simple as putting a fresh coat of paint on, or something even more ambitious that would be, kind of changing the look and feel of your property. That takes money and it takes risk. And, there's not necessarily a guarantee that there'll be return for that. If you're doing full scale redevelopment, it requires a large amount of capital and debt. It requires complicated financing. Again, there's higher and higher levels of risk the more you get into this. And many property owners are not experienced or comfortable with redevelopment. And likewise, many property owners may not have the ability to tap into the debt and the capital that they would need to redevelop the property. So we need to understand that. And then likewise, there's sort of the other side of the economics of redevelopment, which is summarized in this little graph you see here on the right side of the screen. And that is that, even a property that doesn't look like it's doing so great, if there's tenants involved, there's some income being made, and what income, a lot of other things can be kind of written off from a business standpoint of view. So, your expenses are basically operating costs and taxes, and then your income. So basically, most likely in most situations, there's some net income being involved with owning a property. It takes a pretty extreme situation where there's not income involved, and we'll get into that in a moment. So if you're that property owner and you're thinking about redeveloping, you're taking on not just the operating costs and taxes that you're paying today, but you are taking on that capital and profit, that debt service, and potentially losing income because tenants may have to vacate while you're redeveloping, and you have to do new sales and marketing to try to bring new tenants into the property. And what often happens is that this is where the risk comes into play. That gross income may increase after redevelopment, but because you've taken on all these additional expenditures, your net income may be effectively the same. So, what are the situations where you see more net income and a property owner is going to be more encouraged? On the next slide, we talk a little bit about the rule of three. And that's really just the idea that, it's sort of a general rule in real estate and redevelopment is if a property owner can come in, make the investments to redevelop, and they can get 3 times more their investment or their purchase cost, that's when it starts to become attractive to a lot of property owners and developers. So, basically, you need a situation where the revenue associated with the property falls below its operating cost. Whether the vacancies are so low or the rents have declined to the point or cost has risen, or there needs to be a potential, revenue that justifies, basically disrupting what you already have going on at the site and justifying taking on that increased risk and that increased effort. So, just as a little bit of a disclaimer, as we start talking about redevelopment options, I do want to stress that, what we're doing right now and talking about today and during this plan, it's about visioning. It's about visioning what can be for the future. And our ultimate goal is to develop strategies so that the vision can come to be a reality. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And there's just some, kind of fundamental things about redevelopment. And then there's some systemic issues that, we know on this in this neighborhood and know that are going to make it challenging. So we want to be aware of that context. Next slide, please. All right, so we are going to be using an application called Pigeonhole to ask and answer some questions today. And for those of you who might have a phone or a tablet with you, in addition to whatever you're looking at, I would highly recommend using that phone or tablet, but you can certainly also do it on the same device that you are viewing, whether it's a computer or a device that you're viewing this meeting on. So if you go to www.pigeonhole.com and you enter the pass GCD1, or you can just use the QR code. That's the easy way to do this if you have a QR reader. That's going to bring you to a whole platform where you're going to see a variety of questions that we're going to be going through over the next few minutes. And I'll give everyone a moment to join in on that. And if anyone's having trouble with that, getting in, we'll kindly ask that you just mention something in the chat bar, and someone from our team will get with you and try to help you out. Again, that's pigeonhole.at, and the passcode is GRCD1, or you can use the QR code. All right, I'm going to trust that everyone is in, and we're going to move to the next slide. And Aubrey just put the information in the chat box for anyone who's having trouble. So let's talk a little bit about the mobile in this node in So there are some good things that are happening here. We have MARTA service on both Glenwood and Columbia, and we have some bus shelters. That's always very nice in some locations. We do have a pretty extensive sidewalk system on parts in parts of this study area, particularly on the west side of Glenwood Road, a project that looks like it went in, probably about a few years ago. On the east side of Glenwood Road, unfortunately, the sidewalks are pretty sparse to non-existent, although there is a project coming along that we'll talk about in a moment. On Columbia Drive, we do have some sidewalks as well, but they're a little bit intermittent, particularly on the north side. And we see what we often refer to as desire lines, where you can see that the grass and is kind of worn down from people walking on it. So we know that people are walking in these areas, that they're using these corridors in that mechanism, but they don't necessarily have a sidewalk that that they can walk on. I think it's also important to talk about the quality. Places where we do have sidewalks, they're pretty narrow. Maybe 2-3 feet wide at best. Kind of substandard relative to current design standards. We were out there doing a site visit a few weeks ago, and at one point someone passed us, and they're really the sidewalk wasn't wide enough for two people to kind of be standing parallel to each other on that sidewalk. Kind of had to kind of step to the side of each other. So that's something to be thinking about also, not just the presence of sidewalks, but also their quality. And then, of course, Glenwood Road and Columbia Drive are both pretty wide roadways. Glenwood Road has what we call a 5-lane section through most of this, which is 2 lanes in each direction, and then a center 2-way left turn lane. And Columbia Drive has a little bit of that as well. So if you're not at a traffic signal and you're trying to get from one side of the road to the other, it's quite expanse to cross. So we want to be thinking about safety as well. So I think I already mentioned this, but we do have those new sidewalks along Glenwood Road, east of Columbia or west of Columbia Drive, and we do have some good pedestrian infrastructure, but it is a little bit disconnected, particularly on the north side of Glenwood and the east side of, or the east side of Columbia and the north side of Columbia. We also, are fortunate to have, several MARTA bus routes that serve this area. So, there is good coverage, and all the stops are within walkable distance of the area that we're looking at. And then there are some improvements that are coming along, in addition to the improvements that have already gone in recently, such as the sidewalks on the west side of Glenwood. The 2014 the CAB CTP Comprehensive Transportation Plan identified the need for sidewalks on the east side of Glenwood Road. And as I understand it, there's a SPLOST project that's in the queue to make that happen. And then thinking a much longer term, there were some ideas in the CAB Transit Master Plan that was done a couple of years ago that identify, ideas for light rail along Glenwood Road and then arterial rapid transit along Columbia Drive. Those are not really in the funded portions of that plan, but they were things that were, developed and conceived as part of that effort. So, in future conversations, those may appear again. Next slide. And land use, we certainly want to think about land use, especially if we're talking about redevelopment. So within the 2030, the county's 2035 comprehensive plan, this area is articulated as what we call a commercial redevelopment corridor, which is basically a commercial corridor, has commercial retail, may have some office, condominiums, townhomes, and some mixed use apartments, which these are all things that you see in this area. But the tag of commercial redevelopment corridor is really what kind of aligns us with some of the things we're doing today. It's an area that has been identified for having a need and a desire for some level of redevelopment. And when we get into specific land use on the next slide, we do have a series of different land uses. A lot of the corridor is C1, which is local commercial. We do have a little bit of C2. We also have some office institutional zone, or I should say these are zoning. This is not necessarily use. So, for instance, in the office institutional zoning area, we do have a little bit of industrial as well. And then, of course, we're surrounded by a lot of residential at R75. And just to put kind of some looks on it, we do have multifamily housing. Again, we have a lot of auto-oriented commercial all through both of these corridors, and then very very explicitly at the intersection of Glenwood and Columbia. We have the Meineke, we have the Exxon, which is shown in that image number 2 there. We do have some retail. The CVS, which it's probably the most recent thing to go in sometime in the 90s. And then we have some strip commercial. Some of it's doing better than others. Some of it's relatively utilized, if not necessarily what would be considered the highest use for those properties, and then some of it's vacant. We've also been doing, in anticipation of this, we have an online survey, an online interactive map. And we've already received a lot of responses. In fact, I checked it about an hour ago, and on the interactive map, we already have over 100 comments. So for those of you who have already, participated in that, we really appreciate that. For those of you who have not, the map and survey will be open through November 25th, which I think that is, that's next Friday, I want to say. Basically, you have about a week. And on the next slide, we're actually going to show you. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We'll get into how you can participate in that if you have not done so already and are not aware in a couple of moments. So, we do want to ask just as sort of an overall question, you know, is this an area that you think should be changed or should it be preserved? Or sort of a third option, which is where that map really comes into play. Do you think there are some areas that should change, but some areas that should be preserved? And you can see as you're responding to this question within Pigeonhole, you'll actually see the answers change in real time on the screen. So it gives us a great understanding of kind of how people are thinking in real time. And again, this is at pigeonhole.at, and the passcode is GRCD1. And you can actually see that information at the top left of the screen as well. And we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to vote in. But already we're seeing definitely some majority preference for some areas should change and some areas should be preserved, which is what we expected. We'll give it just another moment, but I think we got the general sense of what people are thinking. All right, why don't we go to the next slide? So we're definitely seeing some desire for change, but also it is a little bit mixed. So if you have not participated in that interactive map gives you the opportunity to tell us of the node you think should be changed and what parts of the node you think should be preserved. So, if that question kind of stumped you a little bit because we're thinking about a fairly large area, we really do encourage you to visit the site. It's www.planningatpond.com/Glenwood-Columbia. And again, that's going to be open for about another week. We really do welcome your participation and it's a pretty cool site. Gives you the opportunity to provide comments and also look at what other people have said and opine on whether you agree or disagree. So we really do encourage you to participate in that. And then the information is also in the chat bar for you to log on later if you'd like. Okay, next slide. So we also, as we're thinking about redevelopment, we do want to think about community scale. And this image that you've seen here depicted in front of you, which you may have seen before, we've used it a bit in various things that we've done. It really depicts sort of the whole experience of land development at a kind of a general community level. Everything from on the far left, rural, rural development where you don't have a lot going on, all the way to urban development on the right side of the screen where you have effectively very very large cities, downtown Atlanta, for instance. But then there's a lot of in between. You have ex-urban development where there's development, but it's very very thorough. You have suburban development, which is generally what we would classify this area as. And then we also have town center or neighborhood village type development, which is has a little bit more intensity going on in a traditional suburban environment, but it's not necessarily an urban environment either. So thinking about that, let's go to the next slide. And we do want to hear from everyone what you think, generally speaking, you believe would be the appropriate scale in this area. So you can hit 1 for ex-urban, 2 for suburban, which is what it is today, 3 for town center, and 4 for urban center. And I'll likewise share that if you go to that website we just talked about with that interactive map, you'll have the ability to put markers down relative to these categories in specific locations also. So right now we're just kind of asking generally what you think the feel of it should be, but there's the opportunity for that interactive map to provide a lot more granular data as well. And we're definitely seeing, as we sort of anticipated, a lot of interest in town center type development. We'll give everyone another moment or two. I think there's still a few participants on the screen. We'll give everyone a moment or two, but then we'll move on. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so we have another question here. that we're starting to get a little deeper into what we're thinking of here. So we'd like to know what types of land use and development features you would like to see at this location. So we have lots of different types of categories, lots of different types of residential. You can vote for all of them and you can vote for none of them. But we'd like to get a sense of what you would like to see in this area. So we'll give everyone a couple of moments to go through that. Certainly seeing a lot of interest in restaurants and green space and retail and entertainment. Of course, the numbers are switching on me as I'm talking. So what are examples of civic use? So civic use is it's a bit encompassing, but everything from and we don't want to we don't want to put expectations out there that these are the types of things that would happen, but everything from a community center to a library to you could even argue a religious institution would have a civic use. Basically something that's communal for people to come together and act as a community. As a general sort of statement, I would consider a civic use. This is great. We really appreciate getting so much input here. 78 votes. That's awesome. We'll give everyone another couple of moments, but then we'll move on. We're going to go ahead and move on, but if you're still in this, rest assured that your answers are still going through there, and we'll have the opportunity to look back at everyone's responses even after this presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Aubrey Saba with the Pond team also to talk a little bit about some of the placemaking elements we could think about here.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here and great to get all of your feedback and input. I'm going to go quickly through existing conditions and opportunities and constraints, and then we'll spend a little time on 2 high-level scenarios and get your thoughts and feedback on that, as well as some look and feel imagery preference surveys. So this first slide just takes a look at a few aspects of the existing conditions as it pertains to the place. We have the several churches in the area and the cemetery, the GHK Gabriel Ethiopian Church and the Hardeman Primitive Baptist Church. And as Eric had mentioned earlier, we've got pretty high setbacks and a lot of frontage parking along the major corridors. And we also have the abandoned bowling alley, the entertainment. Next slide. So here we have a sketch of opportunities and constraints as we've been thinking out what's here, what are the possibilities, what are maybe some things that we'd like to see change. And one of the things that we've seen a lot in the social pinpoint is local businesses and those opportunities for the local businesses as we move forward in this area. We're also looking at a lot of heavy commuter traffic, particularly along the major corridors. And then we have a lot of adjacent residential to the north and to the south. Again, this is an auto-oriented commercial area and also some light industrial. We've got some auto and vehicular commercial and car lots along here. And then another item to point out is the potential mixed use node at the intersection of Columbia and Glenwood. So this first scenario is based on some of the initial feedback that we received from you all. This is a bubble diagram. It's very high level. On both scenarios, we've really looked at, what could be potential improvements and development. For each of these, we look at from a placemaking standpoint, particularly pedestrian safety is key, and how the design and the shape of the buildings really shape the public spaces and where you locate parking, and how circulation and vehicular circulation can improve safety in this area. And we also really take a look at what can the development or what can the improvements do to really make it a family and neighborhood oriented center, so that all people from folks 8 years old to 80 can have easy access. It's navigable. It's something that you can come to and enjoy and have multiple opportunities to come back and visit and interact with friends and neighbors. So this first alternative, we're calling it a neighborhood center. You know, there are different varieties or levels of a town center that you could look at, but due to the smaller area and due to it just being clustered in the neighborhoods, we thought that neighborhood center might be a more appropriate name. And it looks at lining the corridors with a little bit higher intensity development and then stepping back. So you might look at a higher intensity development at the intersection of Glenwood and Columbia, and then your building heights would step back as you move away. And the blue area says to retain. So that's the water treatment area right there. So this also looks at moving parking interior of the buildings and moving it off of the major corridors. That enhances safety. It reduces the number of driveways and intersections that you have onto the major corridors. So it really also pushes that back behind the buildings and creates a safer vehicular and pedestrian experience. Again, we would look at adding in and defining the street typology and hierarchy, improving the vehicular and pedestrian circulation. And we would look at these items for both options. And then this also would create opportunity for local and small businesses and goods and services, as well as integrating green space. Next slide. So alternate B is the retrofit and infill. This option seeks to preserve and or restore some of the existing structures. You know, the places like Peachcrest Gardens, existing residential, Midwood Glen Apartments as well on the south side, the Glenwood Health and Rehabilitation Center. The churches are a few places that we would look to preserve. And again, this option also would concentrate higher intensity development along Glenwood and Columbia. And it would also integrate green space to buffer from the development and the residential areas. Next slide. So we'd like to hear from you. Which alternative do you prefer? Do you like A? Do you like B? Would you like to see a mix of both? So we'll leave it just for a few minutes so folks can input their votes. Jason says he likes both. So it looks like folks would like a little bit of both. Feel free to enter into the chat if there's a specific aspect of one or the other that you'd like to see. And you can keep voting on this. We encourage you to keep voting on this. But in the interest of time, and we'll move on to the next element here. So here we have a series of look and feel surveys. We'd like to know what you all want to see in this area. And so these are a few images, 1 through 9. You can vote for as many as you would like that represent different types of development. The first image, many of you might be familiar with, is in Decatur, where the 365, the Whole Foods is. That's an infill development. Liner buildings around along the major corridors with parking in the interior. Number 2 is in Chambly. It's a 3 to 5 story mixed use development with greenway connections and very pedestrian oriented restaurants, retail, with residential and office on the upper levels. Number 3 is an infill with grocery store and your standard chains, restaurants. Number 4 are townhomes with nice facades, really emphasizing a walkable live work opportunity. And number 5 is at Hosea and 2nd. There's a lake and a barbecue in there, lots of restaurants, Poor Hendricks mixed up with modern infill, 2 to 3 story development. Number 6 is the Beacon. It's in Grant Park with entertainment, restaurants, mixed use. Number 7 is the Atlanta Dairies on Memorial Drive. That's a really good example of a mixed use corridor. Number 8 is in Duluth. It's small businesses, food, entertainment, a nice community gathering spaces. And number 9 is in Summerhill on George Avenue with retail and restaurants and facade improvements. So keep voting on that one for a little bit longer. Thank you all for giving us your feedback. It looks like we've leveled off. We've got 2 more of these, and we want to allow a little bit of time for questions. So let's move on to the next one. And this one is for open space and parks. So we have a series of images here. We'd like to know, what do you want to see happen in this area at Glenwood and Columbia? One is wider sidewalks with street furnishings, green space. Number 2, playgrounds, interesting playgrounds with unique features. Number 3 is community and plaza gathering spaces. 4 is an open green surrounded by townhomes. 5 is a town square with a fountain, places for kids to play, site furnishings, seating. And number 6, small seating areas adjacent to the community, the apartments there. 7 is a small illuminated gathering space associated with restaurants, as well as number 8. And number 9 is a community garden. We know there's one community garden already in the area associated with one of the churches. Would you like to see more of that? So we'll have about 6 folks on here, so we'll wait just a little bit longer and get a few more votes in. See, a lot of folks really like number 1. Playgrounds are always great to include. All right, let's move on to the last survey. Which is streetscape. And so we'd like to see and hear from you all what types of streetscape elements appeal to you. Number 1 is sidewalk dining, separated by a planter from parking and the road. Number 2 is wide sidewalks with ADA access and plenty of space and room for biking facilities. And number 3 is also a combination of separated on-street parking and a bike lane and pedestrian lane adjacent to development. Number 4 is an example of bioswales or green infrastructure, separating the sidewalk from the street. Number 5 is your typical kind of wider streetscape, separated by a small lawn, the pedestrian walkway. And number 6 is sidewalk adjacent to development with nice paving, benches and street furnishings separated from the road by planters, street trees, and vegetation. And number 7 is also another example of that. Number 8 is an example of a roundabout with planting and an art feature. So integrating green space into the vehicular infrastructure. And number 9 is a nice vehicular streetscape with good materials and pavements, on-street parking, and lighting. See a lot of folks like on-street dining on the sidewalk, something really important right now to a lot of us. And it looks like our voting is leveled off. We'll go ahead and turn it back over to Eric to let us know what's coming up next and also open up to Q&A.
Thank you, Aubrey. So hopefully everyone found that a little bit informative, and you know, we really absolutely appreciate everyone's input. This gives us a lot to work with over the next few hours as we come up with some more refined ideas. So over the next few hours, you know, the team's going to be putting together some additional sketches and diagrams, you know, prioritizing some ideas, and we'll basically be presenting that to you this evening, a framework and strategy plan that really kind of defines how, you know, what this vision could look like. And we'll certainly be looking for feedback this evening as well. I definitely want to reinforce that what we do over the next few hours and what you'll see this evening is not the plan. This whole thing, what we're doing today is really, you know, sort of step one of a couple of steps that we're going to be doing as part of this entire planning effort. But this will give us the ability to refine even further, so that in December we'll be coming back with kind of a similar meeting to what we're doing today, where we'll be presenting some of our final recommendation ideas and getting feedback. So you know, just rest assured that, you know, what you're going to be seeing, you know, what you've already seen and what you'll see tonight is very incremental in its approach as well. We're building towards a final vision for this area. And I know we have a few minutes, so we'd be happy to take any questions on the next slide. You can see there's a Q&A for those of you playing around Pigeonhole, have probably noticed. So this is an opportunity to ask questions or provide some comments. So we do have, I may have missed this, but what is the timeline for this project to take place? Great question. You didn't miss anything. We didn't really address that. So the work that we're doing, this actual planning process, is a very sort of short tactical piece of work that we're doing really between now and the end of the calendar year. So that's why we'll be coming back to you in December, like I mentioned, with sort of a final meeting to solidify what we think the vision should be, and also develop some strategies and recommendations that can go along with that vision. You know, as far as the redevelopment, there's a lot that can go on that can influence that. A lot of it out of, you know, our control. And that really gets to what the purpose of what we're doing with all this is, which is we're trying to lay out the vision so we can identify the strategies and steps that, you know, the county and potentially some partners that we can work with can use to help, you know, encourage some private reinvestment in the area. But a lot of that's speculative. I think generally speaking, to just kind of manage expectations, redevelopment of this node, that there's a lot of good bones, but there's also lots of challenges. So, this is probably not something that happens overnight. It took a while to get here, and it'll take a while to kind of redevelop it to the level of some of the visions we're talking about today. We see a statement community garden. So we we appreciate Jason's support for that as an idea. And then we have two comments from William. Information is absent, correction is required. Window options are empty without substantive information to consider. William, if you don't mind speaking in, I'm not sure we're understanding your comment or question, but we'd love to address it to the best of our ability.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Ray Johnson and Larry Johnson. I appreciate their effort in having this underway. I'm just getting used to pigeonhole. I think that was mainly the point I need to become more accustomed to. But I have one question with a follow-up.
Sure.
Can you hear me, first of all?
We can.
Okay. As it relates to organization, given the property owners and the business operators in the area, to what extent are they involved so as to be facilitators of this effort? And two, the water tank, the DeKalb County water tank right at the corner of Peachcrest and Columbia Drive that I've been told is scheduled for repainting. If you can make quick, immediate imagery improvement and enhancements to define this area, that citizens and investors in the area can see something is changing, that could be a beginning point.
Yes, thank you, William. Yeah, that's a great point. We'll dig into that a little bit and see what opportunities there are. In terms of where that's in a schedule and to the degree it could be leveraged to start some aesthetic enhancements. Your other question about to what degree are we engaging with property owners and business owners? Everyone's invited to be part of this process. This is, as I mentioned earlier, a very tactical sort of, kind of short-term approach. And Cedric, kind of referred earlier to it being an LCI light. So in many ways, we're not going as in-depth into that as we would in a fuller process. And really what the goal is to craft what the community vision is and make sure that it's reasonable from an economic perspective. What it does in that regard is it gives the county a tool to have future conversations with property owners. We invite property owners and business owners to be in part of this process, to be, take that ownership at this level. But really, again, to kind of pivot a little bit, really what we're trying to do is lay out that vision so that future conversations can happen, and move forward to potentially some redevelopment.
Thank you.
And then we have another question here. In the first side, you mentioned property owner investments. What incentives are you thinking about to bring them on board? Not your standard incentives as it relates to property taxes, but others. That's a great point and kind of goes along the line with the previous question to a certain degree. One thing that we'll be doing, we're not there yet, to be clear, but one thing that we'll be doing as we get to the end of this process in about a month or so is, we have the vision piece. But then the second piece is, what are the strategies and what are the tools that the county can use to make that vision a reality? So I think we'll start getting into that. We, as Cedric mentioned earlier, we did some similar-ish work on the Memorial Drive corridor for the county last year. We identified a variety of, partners and things that we can do to help spur reinvestment. So we'll be looking at ideas like that for this note as well. And then I saw a note that looks like Commissioner Cochran-Johnson was able to join us. So we certainly want to give her the floor to speak if she'd have anything she'd like to share with the group or just kind of touch base with all of us.
Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to say to both you, Eric, as well as you, Aubrey, thank you so much for the effort. I'm glad that you took the opportunity to explain to everyone the scope of the project and what will happen thereafter. Because one thing I've found in the county, there are lots of studies that are done, but what we really need at this point are action plans. I believe it's important to bring the community to the table, because what you find is there's often quite a bit of consensus on what needs to happen, especially when you live in a community and you understand what is absent, what is missing, and you understand the trends that you see in other neighboring jurisdictions. So when I heard about the study, because I had had separate conversations, because I felt that along this corridor and two others in particular in South DeKalb, there needed to be a study. I feel that this is something that we can build upon. But what I'm really interested in, and I think that we need most, and I think you've heard this before, Eric, is the action plan. Because when you start to look and you understand there's a desire for instance, a grocery store, you've seen here that there's a desire for enhanced retail. The one thing that gives me great excitement when I look at this particular corridor and area is that, of course, what you have is actually a rather small retail center, but you have a tremendous amount of rooftops that surround it. And when you talk economic development, rooftops and incomes are the most important things that fuel the development. So I believe this is an area where we can make things happen, but also coming up with tangible plans, because, you know, when you're expanding and you're bringing in new developments, how do we transition the existing structures that are there and provide them with resources so that they have the ability to change those facades, so that we have communities that look more in line with who we are as community members. So I commend the effort. I'm very excited about what will come. You certainly have my full support, but I don't want us to put it on the shelf. I want us to take it, run with it, utilize it as a tool of change. So again, that's all I have to say. And thank you all for your time. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces on the call. It's those who I would expect to be present. And thank you all so much for what you give to community.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson, Cochran Johnson. And, to kind of, reinforce your point, what I was saying a moment ago with sort of the second piece of this, the first piece being vision, second piece being, how do you achieve that vision? That's the action plan. And that's something that, me and the team that, I work within, we really pride ourselves on actionable plans that aren't going to sit on a shelf, plans that are going to show some forward movement. And again, I do want to stress that, there's redevelopment and revitalization in this area is not going to be an overnight thing. So, it's a cumulative thing and it's an incremental thing. But, certainly our intent as part of this process is to make sure that we, identify what are the actions that are within sort of our toolbox that we can move forward with to start getting things to turn around. I do want to we do want to break because we do have a bit of work to do. But I do see two additional comments / questions that have come up, so I do want to address those real quick, and then we'll go ahead and break unless anyone has some additional final words they would like to share. The first one I see is on the the top right corner. Actually, no, we went through that one. It's the middle one in the top middle. What other ways can you advertise the survey and map? I haven't seen any advertisements in the actual physical center or in the areas around it. That's a great point. We'll kind of talk internally about what else we can be doing to just get the word out. We know we've been sending out a lot of email lists, and it's been on a lot of the commissioner newsletters and things of that nature. And certainly, if you found your way to us as you did today, it was part of those advertisements as well. So we're always trying to do as much as we can to get the word out and get people to engage with us. So far, with over 100 comments for something that's been only open for a week so far, and again, this whole process is very tactical. That's a pretty encouraging number, quite frankly. But we're always looking to get more as well. So appreciate the comment, and we'll talk internally and see what types of things can we do reasonably to make sure we're doing everything we can to get the word out.
Yeah,
Um,
Eric, just 2 words about that also. On our website from our announcements page, we have a quick link on there that will direct you precisely to the project page. So everything that we've talked about and all of the resources for the project is on a universal project page designated specifically for this project. So you can get to it. You can go to the DeKalb County site, you can Google it and go to Planning and Sustainability. And in the announcements, you can click the link. It'll take you right there. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Cedric. And then the last comment here is infrastructure is very important. When there is a heavy rain, the Glenwood-Columbia intersection almost always floods with deep water standing for hours. Will the state cooperate to correct this? So yeah, that's something we should take a look into. You know, are there, you know, what are the infrastructure improvements that could potentially address that? You know, if there's major stormwater issues in this area, that's something we might need to be thinking about. Is there a stormwater facility that potentially needs to be kind of, you know, thought about as part of this plan? So we'll look into that. It's also, you know, quite frankly, there may be, you know, might just be part of a floodplain. And that's a little bit more challenging, but, you know, thanks for bringing that to our attention. This is certainly something that we'll investigate a little bit and see how it could help, you know, how we can address it so that we can better identify opportunities to redevelop. Well, thank you, everyone. That's really all we have. Like I said, we'll reconvene at 6 o'clock tonight with kind of some refined ideas based on feedback and the conversation we've had today. I do want to open up the floor to anyone else who would like to say a few words before we break. But other than that, we'll get going, and we'll see you at 6 o'clock tonight. All right. Well, thank you so much. Really do appreciate everyone's participation. Again, we hope to see you this evening. Thank you so much, and take care.